right. Well, welcome everyone. You are now in our wonderful reviewer workshop because you will all be excellent or wonderful reviewers by the time this is over if you are not already. All right, so while James is working on the slides, I'm Rebecca Goodchild. I'm a SCC librarian and union rep. And then Belinda, you want to introduce yourself?
Morning, everyone. I'm the SCC LRCFT president for the next few months. And then I'm also serves your chief negotiator. And I'm also professor of sociology here.
And James, you're showing your desktop. Okay.
Oh, let's see here. I just lost everything. I'm sorry. Let's
That's
see.
okay.
My screen sharing got stopped. Let me
You
try
may
that
try it.
again. Yeah, if you would, that'd be great.
Cool.
And then James can introduce himself while Rebecca's going.
Sorry about that. I was plugged into my laptop was plugged into my workstation here. So I think I've unplugged and did something. I am James Tells, and I am a longtime librarian at Folsom Lake College and the campus union president up here.
Awesome. Thank you. Can everyone see the slides and the interpreter?
I can.
Awesome. Okay, cool.
All right. So do you want to oh, perfect. Thank you so much. So for our agenda today, the purpose of the PRT, Performance Review Team, we're going to look at reviewer responsibilities, documents used, student reviews, workstation observations, questions around accessibility. We're going to have some recommendations and suggestions. We'll also talk about evidence and share 3 examples, and then have plenty of time for questions at the end. So the purpose of the performance review, sorry, I am going to read this. The primary goal of faculty performance review is to improve the quality of the educational program. The process should promote professionalism, encourage reflection, enhance performance, and be effective in yielding a genuinely useful and substantive assessment of performance. To achieve this goal, it's necessary to identify, recognize, and nurture excellence, to identify standard performance, to encourage regular and substantive faculty-student interaction, and to indicate areas where improvement is necessary or desirable. While formal performance review, as described in this article, occurs on a cyclical basis, informal review by colleagues and supervisors occurs on a continuous basis, and as such, communication should be continuous. And I think that's, we're moving on to Rebecca for this slide, sorry.
Awesome, thank you. So responsibilities of faculty reviewers, which is you, confidentiality. Don't talk about it outside of the space and people on your PRT. Fairness, you're trying to be a supportive, awesome colleague, which is a cool responsibility. Try to keep that in mind. Clarity about what you were allowed to review. We'll go into more details here on that, but it's important that you have like a clear idea of what you're looking for and that you feel confident about it. Providing the dean with your evaluation in a timely manner, so doing your homework on time. Providing evidence as well as recommendation for any evaluation of less than satisfactory. We'll go into this in a bit more detail, but basically if you have a recommendation, you need to have evidence to support it. And clearly communicating what that recommendation is so that faculty can understand what you are looking for, and understanding the difference between that and a suggestion, which we will also go into more details. And then always, of course, stick to the contract. So we posted this here so that you can kind of look up the timelines and any of those type of things that you will need to adhere to. We're in week 7, I believe, so your faculty should have turned in their peer review and equity reflection by now, and you're probably either have done workstation observation or you're about to. Okay. Let's see here. Documents for your reviewee. I believe, are we going to Belinda?
I think you've got this one and the next one, and then Belinda's got the slide 8.
Thanks. I wrote numbers for the slides, but I forgot that I should have wrote the titles of the slides for myself. All right, awesome. So you should have received by this past Friday the self-study from the people that you are reviewing, one or more, and current syllabi if they have that on there, and if they're an instructional faculty member. In their self-study, they are required to respond to recommendations only. So in their previous review cycle, if they had a recommendation as part of the review, they have to address it at the beginning of their self-study. If they received any suggestions from colleagues, they're not required to address those in the self-study. The equity reflection, they have to turn it in, but it cannot be used in the peer review itself. You can use it as a conversational item with the person, but again, it's not subject to review. So you can discuss things that are in it with the person, but you can't put anything from that reflection into the recommendations area or mark them down, so to speak, unless there's other evidence to support those recommendations. Also, student reviews. These, actually, I'm not sure. Just can one of you tell me when these happen? I'm assuming it's in the middle sometime.
So student reviews usually happen, they're currently are defaulting online. So the default week is week 12 for instructional faculty. And then week 6 for first 8-week class, and then I believe it's week 4 for the online second 8 weeks. For counseling, there's usually, I think it's a 1-month period where they start collecting student reviews. So that runs concurrently. And then, well, I'm going to let my librarians answer how library student reviews are done, if they're done.
We do not do student reviews.
Now, what is that? No, it would be tricky.
For coordinators, it depends on the type of coordinator that you are. We have some coordinators that are counseling coordinators, so they would use the counseling process. And similarly to the librarians, we have some who don't have, who are not going to be reviewed by students because it's not part of their sort of daily work work description. So,
well, that's good. Thank you. So notice here, student reviews taken alone may not lead to a less than satisfactory review. However,
sorry, Rebecca, it's
Yeah,
Mark, the interpreter. Could you just slow down just a tinge?
Sure.
That's fine. So go ahead.
Yeah. So if you look here, basically a lot of things you need a pattern of behavior or observations to bring up less than satisfactory. So a student reviews taken alone may not lead to less than that, but if you see other things like your workstation review or other documented things, complaints, investigations, then you can use those in combination for an evidence of less than satisfactory.
We've got a couple questions before Belinda jumps into the next slide. We've got one: do suggestions as opposed to recommendations have to be verbal only, or can they be in writing? And I would jump in and say, LRCFT would say that if folks want to share them in writing, they would be on a separate sheet that would not be going into your file, would not be part of the formal documents of the review, but they would just be suggestions in a Word doc or an email or what have you. Again, because LRCFT holds that suggestions do not have a place in the formal process. They can be part of the informal process. And weigh in, colleagues, if you have more to say on that.
Yeah, I would say that this has been contested territory between the union and the district. But the district admin may sometimes list it as suggestions in the recommendation box, but they do try to clearly list it as suggestions. It's from a legal standpoint, we've been told it's a gray area. So as reviewers, as folks who are reviewing, we recommend as a best practice that you put suggestions on a separate piece of paper, and encourage your committee to put those suggestions on separate pieces of paper. So it's very clear that it's for the faculty member to consider, but they are not required to implement. However, if it is a recommendation, then you are required to implement. So that's one of the reasons we, as a best practice, suggest just separate piece of paper or verbally, as Antonio asked. The next question was, does the faculty have to include the actual recommendation and then their response in the self-study? Yes, if you look at Appendix E or F, depending if it's a full-timer or a part-timer, it does ask you, did you receive recommendations? We also recommend as a best practice that you list the actual recommendation and the steps that you took, and the steps, sorry, I was clearly in reviewee mode, that the reviewer should be looking to make sure that the individual listed the recommendation and what steps they took to remedy the previous recommendation. Because I think as a reviewer, it allows you to see, did they improve? Did they change? Did they adapt the way that the previous committee asked them to? For those of you who are on tenure committees, it may be the recommendation from you. And so you're looking at, did they, is there continuity? But for a lot of those who are tenured, it's 3 years between cycles. And also for adjunct faculty, it's 3 years between cycles. And then one last question is, are we expecting the improvements to be reflected in their course? Depends on the nature of the recommendation, because in each of our reviews, and in the reviews, there are different sections. There are sections on collegiality. There are sections that are based off of content and materials adhering to the student learning outcomes. I think we should all hope that there's improvement, but some of the recommendations may have nothing to do with the course per se, and maybe more behavioral in nature. And so it may not, since you're not in faculty meetings, for example, all the time with this individual, you may not be able to comment one way or the other. James or Rebecca, any other additions there?
I see that. So go ahead, Rebecca.
Oh, there's a follow-up to that
Yeah.
one. So if it is related to the course, then what should our expectations be? Do you want to provide an example, Abida?
Yeah, for example, oh my goodness. For example, if let's say there was a concern about regular and effective interaction with the students, or relating to meeting the course outcomes, or for example, asking to add more assessments and course material, then is that something we would specifically look for in the workstation observation, or would we just presume that they have addressed it in the self-study and consequently we should be okay with that?
I would tell you that the answer is, well, on some of the pieces, I would say yes, because it should be, if they're not teaching to the course outline of record, that is actually a very big problem. And you would want to provide evidence, which we'll go through later, that in reviewing the syllabi and in the workstation review, we've noticed that hypothetically, student learning outcome 2 is not being taught. And if that was a recommendation before, you would simply say that this was a recommendation that was previously noted in an earlier review, there's a way to write it up where you basically tell them this must change. Yeah. Now, asking for additional assessments in those particular pieces is a little bit of gray area. There is a student course outline of record, which may say that you need to do 3 tests, which is something you would need to adhere to. However, if they're meeting what's in the course outline of record and you're just saying you need to do more tests, then you're violating their academic freedom. So again, everything should be associated with the course outline of record in this particular case around assessments and course materials. Because again, faculty have autonomy also over course material, right, that have been approved by the department on the course outline of record.
Sure. Yeah, this is very helpful. I wouldn't want to hijack anyone's time, but for sure, this is a very new area for me, the reviewing process, and I would appreciate maybe, a little extra time at a later point, just so I'm using the exact language and, which is very important in conveying feedback to the faculty.
Yeah, so this is the other thing that we would note is that the final review is co-written by the team.
Right.
So it's both you as a faculty member and the dean, and usually the dean takes the lead on it.
Okay.
So it could be that most of us also have to do a meeting before we go back to the reviewee.
Mm-hmm.
So as we try to wordsmith things, that's the space that you do it. Then you come to mutual agreement about how you want to address a particular issue.
Okay, that is helpful. And if we do have a mid-semester review with the faculty that's being reviewed, then is this the place to share this and have them make changes to the course? Or is this something that would go onto the document?
For folks who have the midpoint meeting, which are generally those who are pre-tenure, yes, you would flag it so that they have an opportunity to change before the next two reviews.
Okay.
Good questions.
Really good.
I
Uh,
believe it's me, correct?
Yes,
Correct.
yep, you've got the next 4.
Great, thank you. As you can tell, this is a little bit of a new workshop for us, and so we don't have our timing down, so we apologize. So let's talk workstation reviews. And I'll start with instructional faculty. Workstation reviews must follow the rules as listed in the contract. And so for instructional faculty, classroom, online and in person, it is conducted between weeks 6 and 15. Most deans will work out the scheduling during the beginning meeting, but at some campuses we found that they tell the individuals that you need to pick a day or pick a week and schedule themselves. Every dean is slightly different on this. So just note that there's no one uniform way that this gets presented at each of the campuses. But for those who are on pre-tenure committees, they usually make sure that at least one person has reviewed a class before the end of week 8, which is next week. And again, it goes back to the question that was just asked, is so that you can flag any kind of problems and give the person an opportunity to course correct. Online reviews. Individuals or you are given access in the reviewer role in Canvas for 7 days. The reviewer role in general allows you to see, for example, go between different small groups that the individual may have set up, allows you to see all of the different modules. There are a few hiccups and that you should work out with the individual is sometimes you may need to put up a false post like I am the reviewer so that you could access discussion boards, because most of us will set discussion boards that you must answer first. Before you get to see everyone else's responses. So just post something that says, I am the reviewer, and you could always delete it later. It is also possible that with quizzes or tests that happen in Canvas, that you may need to go through this during the pre-workstation review with the faculty member because of the permissions. These are hiccups that are caused by Canvas and not the instructor. And so because of this over the last few years, especially during COVID, we've had to come up with some good faith workarounds. And that's really something we really want to emphasize here, is that as long as you're being fair, you're taking a look at the quiz or exam that may be in the module for that week, I think you're fine. Some of you might be okay with just seeing a printed out copy of it. Some of you may just want to see it during the pre-workstation review. That is completely up to you to discuss with the individual. For on-ground reviews, these are conducted on a mutually agreed upon time and date, and you only do one. This is something I want to emphasize. We've had occasions where people were like, well, I want to come back and see a second one. No, that is, as a reviewer, you are not allowed to do this. I should also note that with the online reviews, that 7-day window is also mutually agreed upon. So picking, the week that you'll be in there or the day that you're going to class is incredibly important. For tenured faculty, it's expected that you do 3 workstation reviews, and whenever possible, doing 3 different workstation reviews, meaning different classes or different preps. For some of you, it may be both like a combination of lab and 2 classes, but the dean usually on the front end takes care of those logistics. For tenure track, you also have 3 workstation reviews. And again, similarly, they try to do different workstation preps and reviews. And for adjuncts, it's 1 observation of a course prep. And it's almost always done by a faculty member on the peer review team. It's optional for the admin or dean on the PRT to do an additional observation. So for adjuncts, you will be reviewed by, adjuncts are reviewed by a faculty member. It's optional whether or not the dean decides to do an observation.
Okay, Belinda, we have a question in the chat from Walter. He asked, should the reviewer do other stuff, take the quiz, do an assignment? Do reviewers review how the instructor grades?
We do not review how the instructor grades, although sometimes it's helpful to, particularly in an online class, to show the types of feedback. So some folks will give sample feedback that they gave for an A assignment, a B assignment, a C assignment. Sometimes they may when you do the walkthrough of your class, you can talk about, okay, so here's an example of an assignment. Here's some sample feedback for you to look at. They don't necessarily take the quiz, but they may want to see the quiz you're giving that week, if it's part of the module that they're viewing for that week.
Okay. And then Pamela Bimby asked, for an online review, is it appropriate to request a synchronous meeting to have the instructor walk through things or answer questions the reviewer may have? If so, can they decline that request?
So for online classes, there is something called the pre-workstation review. It is optional, and we have recommended to all faculty that they do the meeting. If it isn't mutually agreed upon, you can't force it. But it also means that as a reviewer, if you don't have answers and then you end up writing up your review because you didn't understand how, let's say, regular and effective contact is made, without evidence to the contrary, it would be really hard for the reviewee to refute. So we've always recommended that this walkthrough is non-punitive. It's to help introduce your reviewer to the setup of the class, the culture of the class, because they're parachuting into you all are parachuting into a class 7, 8, 10, 15 weeks in, and students already have the vibe. Students already know what's going on, and the questions that they may have had were answered in week 2. And so, but you cannot force that pre-meeting by contract.
Hey, Belinda, I have a quick clarification. You mentioned we could post as reviewers, we could post on the discussion board, for example, just to say, hey, this is the reviewer. Is that something that we need to take permission from the faculty before to say, hey, is it okay for me to go ahead and post on your discussion? Or is it something, if you are in the review process, that 7 days, we can just go ahead and do it?
I think it's the collegial thing to do. And that's one of the things that we really want to emphasize here is that peer review is supposed to be collegial.
Okay.
If for example, depending on the settings, and it may be that the discussion board is wide open and you don't need to post anything. But for example, in my online classes, I have small groups, and then I set the discussions that you cannot see other people's answers until you post yourself. So
Right.
if Karen Turco is trying to review my class and wants to see the discussion board, if she doesn't put something in there that says I am reviewer or hi, my name is Karen, she's not going to see the discussion posts. She won't have access.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
But what
Thank
I
you.
would,
That makes, yeah.
Karen,
Thank you. That makes
Karen
sense.
is center screen for me. That's why I'm calling. I'm basically saying I would just Karen to be like, hey, I'm just going to post something on your board just so I could see the reviews, and I'd be like, great. So,
Thank you.
And one more question before we move on. Is Canvas access required for the reviewer, or is it sufficient for the person being reviewed to walk you through their online course?
for an online class, it's absolutely mandatory. For the on-ground classes, no. For hybrid, it depends as the committee how you're reviewing it. So for example, some folks run what we call a completely flipped classroom. So all the content may be in Canvas. It would be advisable, because so much of the review is based off of content and your ability to teach the student learning outcomes, that they would have access to Canvas. But all of that should be, and on a hybrid class, would be pre-negotiated. But for on-ground, no. For online, absolutely. So for non-instructional, workstation reviews must follow the rules as listed in the contract. Counselors, coordinators, and librarians, and these are for counselors, coordinators, and librarians. Remote and on-ground reviews are conducted on a mutually agreed upon time and date. I think for those folks who are counselors or counselor coordinators, it's especially important because the person under review needs to ask permission from the student, or at least let them know, because they may be working with a student in a sensitive topic and it may not be the best time for you to be there. So you may need to exercise some flexibility in the interest of the student. So workstation reviews are different for non-instructional faculty depending on your category. And if you have questions on this, I'm going to defer to my two colleagues here. But for example, they may observe an orientation that you do at the library. They may sit in on a counseling appointment. They may look at how you handle your time at the research help desk. They may look at a grant or project that you are leading as part of your work as a DE coordinator. They may sit in on workshops or events that are part of your regular work. So, but again, all of these things should be mutually agreed upon beforehand, right? Times, dates, etc. In terms of the review, I think it's really important to note that faculty have an obligation to meet student accommodations. So for those of us who, whether you're teaching HCD or a subject matter, you have an obligation that when you get a letter from DSPS that you meet those students' accommodations. That may mean extra time on a test. They may have an interpreter in the room. They may have a stenographer. There are a lot of different accommodations that need to be met, and that we must follow those. However, it's also important to note that faculty reviewers may not give recommendations and or a ranking of less than satisfactory for general accessibility work for in-person or online classes. So for example, you cannot require that the faculty member closed caption materials. You cannot require that they use universal design. It doesn't mean that if you as a faculty have decided you want to do this work, they are absolutely able to. But per our contract, this general accessibility work is not required and therefore cannot be recommended. The reason we mention this is that some reviewers have falsely interpreted 8.4.13 of the contract, which reads adjusts methodologies for students with diverse and or special needs and or different learning styles to be an accessibility standard. This is just not true. This is not what that standard is for. Accessibility is not a methodology, but by extension, an individual cannot be negatively evaluated for accessibility under this article. This analysis.
Yeah. So, sorry to interrupt. Would you be able to clarify what exactly then 8.4.13 means?
So, for example, when we talk about different learning styles, it could be that do you do small work group work? Do you do small group work? And when you talk about diverse or special needs, it's also about diversifying kind of curriculum that if students have asked for particular help in a particular way. So maybe doing more case studies or our friends in math, right? Looking at different ways in which you can workshop materials. But this is not an accessibility standard, right? The meaning for this was to really acknowledge that we have students with different needs in the class. So this is where the difference between accessibility and accommodations come in. If a faculty member has a letter from the DSPS office, and it says, we must make these accommodations for students. Those are required. So again, extra time, making sure we send the tests over to the testing center, sending materials over so that DSPS can remediate them for the students or put them in into the format that's needed. All of those are accommodations that we must make. General accessibility is asserting that we need to change our materials for all students, regardless of whether or not they have an accommodation. So yes, you must meet accommodations, but if general accessibility work, again, is not part of the expectation. And this particular methodology focuses on, again, if let's say you've had 3 student complaints that you failed to meet accommodations, yes, you can be rung up for that. It could also be about statements you make about different groups, but again, it is not an accessibility standard.
And if it
Thank you.
does show up on your, in recommendations, please talk to your union, one of your union reps immediately.
Or vice versa, please don't write it as the reviewers.
That's right. So, yeah, sorry, I forgot what workshop we were in. Whatever it shows up, don't do it or report it.
Also, there are some other standards that where people have been given a less than satisfactory ranking. 8415 interacts with students and colleagues across employee groups with dignity and respect. Again, this is not an accessibility standard. Promotes an inclusive classroom or workplace environment that is free from harassment, prejudice, or bias. Again, not an accessibility standard. Generally, 8416 is something that comes up if people have made homophobic, racist, fill in the is in the phobias in their comments in their classroom directed at a student, generally also substantiated by student complaints.
Okay, I think this is me. I think we've caught up on the questions in the chat. So recommendations: in all reviews, the reviewers shall cite specific examples and recommendations for improvement in writing for each needs improvement and unsatisfactory mark. The faculty member under review shall have an opportunity to append any written rebuttal or explanations to the review form. I think this mid-semester meeting is very helpful in not having this occur. So it's vital, if that meeting is occurring, that if you see something that looks like, wow, this we're going to need some improvement here, or this is very unsatisfactory, this is a real problem here, that needs to be communicated to the faculty member immediately, so they can jump on that. That's the connection back to that kind of no surprises that we want to see in this process. That being said, if we're seeing patterns, student complaints, saw something in the workstation that is going to require a needs improvement or an unsatisfactory, we want to note exactly what it is that was seen, and give some examples of what might help to improve this deficiency. And we'll discuss some examples at the end also. Any questions about that? So recommendations are not suggestions, and we talked about this a little bit before. The recommendations are there to address serious issues. It's not a place for teaching tips. So that's why we want to try to keep that tips and suggestions separated from these official forms and these official places within the forms. By contract, faculty must address any recommendations from their last review and in their current review. And as mentioned before, it's good practice to say, this was the recommendation, this is how I tackled it. It looks like we've got a hand up, Amita.
Hi, thanks, James. So thank you for that tip about the mid-semester review. Sometimes, it's not possible to have mid-semester reviews for everybody. And because tenure track faculty would benefit more, let's say you have a department that does that, but then the tenured faculty, if they do not have the opportunity for a mid-semester review, then when initially you talked about continuous, would it be fair to assume that the evaluators or the reviewers would give you feedback sometime in the process so it doesn't kind of explode at the end of semester meeting?
That's great. Thank you for bringing us back to that, because that is just for the tenure track group, what I spoke of. And that's part of that continuous communication. And we also recommend that the communication to and from reviewers and from the reviewee should go to the whole group. So if someone spots something in a workstation observation, that conversation can happen via email amongst the entire group. And that can happen, of course. I try, and of course I'm not reviewing a whole bunch of librarians at the same time. But I try within maybe 24 to 48 hours of a workstation observation, good or bad, to get my observations to the team, including the reviewee. So it's fresh in my mind. I get it down and get it shared as soon as possible.
That's awesome. Thank you, James.
Yeah, I think it often depends on the culture of the department, et cetera. So I know that at least in my department, we share our quick observations is what we call it, via email, but also noting that this is not the final review. So, it's not required is what I'm going to say, right? For tenured faculty or even for adjunct faculty to have that sort of heads up. And it's often informed by the culture of your department. So I just want to kind of clear up that I think some of us do it out of collegial respect for one another, but it's not a requirement. And I think I think especially like James and I have been involved in a lot of stuff at our campuses because we get pulled in. So it really will depend.
Okay, I think I have one more. Yes, what is evidence? Not following the course outline of record would be some evidence that we need to see some improvement, obviously. Not following code of ethics for your field. Some of our fields have very specific and code of ethics that it's felt that all folks in that discipline are going to follow. Patterns of behavior. So if we see repeated observations, multiple observers are seeing the same issue. Substantiated investigations. This is really important because we've grieved and won major grievances when unsubstantiated reports and investigations are mentioned amongst the reviewers prior to the final findings of the investigation. So it's really important that it needs to be a substantiated investigation if it's going to be brought in at all. Not something in progress, it needs to be an official investigation. Receiving discipline. So if something's happened and discipline has been meted out by the administration for a particular issue, that can be noted. And ignoring previous recommendations and repeating the behavior as several of us have mentioned already. Issues that have not been raised formally and documented during the performance review may not be used negatively in the performance review. So that's 815.1.2. In other words, you don't put random stuff in the recommendations. You really want to have those particular types of evidence just mentioned in there. Any questions about that? I don't think I see anything in the chat. Okay, I think best practices is you, Belinda.
I was just like lost track of what number we were on. Okay, so best practices. Reviewers can only come into a class or work observation on a mutually agreed upon day and time. We keep emphasizing this because this is something that has repeatedly come up at our campuses where they're like, oh, I didn't get everything I wanted as a reviewer. And so they come to a second one. That is not allowed under contract. However, let's say whether it's the reviewer or the reviewee has a family situation come up and they need to reschedule. That's absolutely fine. Rescheduling is fine on a mutually agreed upon date. But unfortunately, we've seen a number of instances where folks were like, I want to do 2 observations. No, only the one. Reviewers can only complete 1 workstation review per member of the team. So again, the dean should have already divvied up the workload. And so in an online Canvas review, the reviewer can also only look at the week under review and the public facing pages. So when we talk about public facing pages, that can be your announcements, it can be the syllabus. You may be looking in general at how they present different resources. But when reviewing the content, you're only allowed to do the week under review. And so that is incredibly important. They should not be evaluating what our former chief negotiator, Casey Boylan, called everything in the kitchen sink. So it's a very confined 7-day period. Walter, go ahead.
Well, I had my visit, my walkthrough this morning from two of my reviewers, and part of it was I didn't know, and I'm not sure if they knew of that this part, and what I did was I pointed out and I said, hey, by the way, check out this stuff in the announcements area. Yeah, so that's also public facing, but also I said, there's some stuff that was covered in the module 0 where I began where I set up the class that discusses my expectations for their written work or something like that, and so I kind of directed them to check this stuff out, and where they can see information about the syllabus and the work expectations. So I directed them to look at certain things that were not in the 7-day.
Yes.
So,
And Walter, that's
yeah.
fine. Yeah. So
Okay.
Walter, that's actually a good, I would consider that a best practice, to show your reviewers where they can find information that they think would be helpful for students, that your students would access, that may be different from the logic of how they set up their own courses or their own work. So I think I think you did exactly what that pre-workstation review meeting is expected to do, which is to point, direct, show them how you're meeting regular, effective, or different aspects of the regular and effective content.
Because it's like, it's because I was concerned because it's outside of those 7 days, because there was stuff I taught them in the first 2 weeks kind of thing. But it's cool.
Yeah, I think it's fine, although if all of a sudden they start bringing up a lot of recommendations hypothetically, then I would call our friend James to have him take a look at it, because the content that they're supposed to be evaluating is the week that you're officially under review. And so those are the types of situations. Sometimes there may or may not be a contract violation, but those are the types of questions we always encourage bringing to a union rep or the union president at your campus. So
there's a question that Rebecca answered. Can reviewers make recommendations for department service or activities outside the classroom? And that's a question that's pretty loaded. There's a lot going on there. So service is completely at the command of the faculty member. So Rebecca is right. You could, if there's evidence that folks aren't doing any college service at all, that yes, it could be brought up that part of your job is not happening and needs to happen, but no specific examples of what they'd like you to go do should be there.
It would be hard to prove that you're not doing it. So I feel like this is kind of like we've all agreed to it. Please do your college service, but I think it's left gray on purpose that you have freedom to be an awesome colleague. And the more we pin these things down, it gets more micromanagey. So yeah,
let me give you a tangible example of something that was proven. An individual listed that they were a senator and they were fulfilling their service by being on one of the Senate committees, which keeps open notes and attendance. The dean, or a member of the committee, but I think in this case that I had, the dean went through the attendance and realized that this person was absent and yet claimed for 2 years that they were on the Senate. It's totally micromanaging, but there is evidence that you are claiming service that you didn't do. So know that if you are on Brown Act committees, which are anything related to the Senate, right, those are the types of service that they can look into. Now, if you're like Rebecca, James, and I, all of our service comes from the union. So we don't necessarily have open roles where they're going to go look at it, but at the other end of it, it's a very gray area, as Rebecca said, but there are ways in which it can be demonstrated.
And the second part of, oh, go ahead, Belinda.
I was like, the other thing, and James and I have heard this in negotiation ad nauseum the last 3 rounds, But what about the person who said that they were coaching their kids' little league team? I hate that example, but it comes up all the time. I'm like, okay, well, sure. If they're the baseball coach, yes, that can be maybe considered service to their profession. But for me or James or Rebecca, maybe not so much, because we can't prove how it informs our assignment. Although, for all I know, James and Rebecca are doing a whole, displays on baseball in our learning resource centers, in which case they may have an argument. I, on the other hand, as a sociologist, would be hard pressed.
So the second part of that question from Laura was, can reviewers make recommendations on activities outside the classroom? And I think, to me, what I thought of first for a yes is that if there's something that's matching up the recommendation to a needs improvement or unsatisfactory, that they could note, not that you specifically need to go do this thing, but it could be one of the part of the recommendations is giving some remedies, could note some professional development in this particular area. Does that sound square with you, Belinda and Rebecca, that would be an okay?
Yes. So, for example, let's say in the workstation review, you witness the faculty member engaging in microaggressions against Latinx students, although I hope that's not true, but let's say that was the observation. In your recommendation, you could write that in order to better serve our Latinx students and to prevent using microaggressions in the classroom, we recommend attending workshops related to the retention of our Latinx students. For example, and you may want to just give an example, but you shouldn't direct the specifics, but you can give an overarching category.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had a follow-up question to that. I remember receiving an email about the number of hours that needed to be so that we needed to put in for college service. Is that something that then becomes part of, evidence that they have served a certain X number of hours? Is that something that?
Well, we're supposed to do about 178 annually.
178.
If you're instructional. Counselors, depending on the number of peak weeks that have been assigned, that number might go down as low as 140. But service is a very wide open category. It also includes, for example, a lot of us, the librarians may do an orientation workshop, and then they're talking with students for an hour afterwards about good research practices. That is service. It's about how you capture those particular hours. So, but loosely speaking, for those of us who are on a 164 schedule, which are basically the 2 semesters, it averages out to about 5 hours a week on average. But let's say you volunteer for, I just forgot, Celebrate City, which in a big spring activity, you're out there for 10 hours. There's 10 of your 172. It's again meant to encourage that we engage in campus life, shared governance, that you used your faculty voice for the power of good. It's about putting the community back in community colleges. It's very wide open on purpose, but it is an important part of the work that we do.
Sure. So if sorry.
It's not an accounting cheat, though. It is not an accounting cheat, because most of us probably do a lot more than the ones.
Yeah, that's great to know. However, if in
I'm in
our
a meeting
reviewer-
right now, so it's a meeting.
I'm sorry. So
Yeah.
okay.
Put down right here, 27 okay.
Okay. So just as a follow-up to that, as a reviewer, then if we are presented with a self-study document that doesn't seem to reflect those kind of hours, or is significantly lower than the hours that you just mentioned, what would be the best suggestion or verbiage to indicate that?
Again, you need to provide evidence. And so, James, I'm going to let you tackle this one.
Yeah. So I guess what you're saying is you'd see a list and you would think in your mind that those tasks would not equate to that number of hours. Do I have that right? Is that what you're?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And not even being a county or micromanaging, just very significantly lower.
I mean, you you could ask about that. I
Okay.
would say that's the first thing I would do. Normally, I would hope that the dean would be the person that would be the one
Right.
that asks that, and
Okay.
should be noting that too, and ask that early on as soon as you've in week 6 you've gotten that, and hopefully by week 7 you've had a chance to look through it and maybe ask those questions of the reviewee. Yeah, we don't. All we have had contractually, in the way of having sort of a record on this, is to have the check sheet that you check the different types of college service you've done. And through the years, of course, in negotiations, district will come up with the person teaching baseball, these one-off examples, and want to say, how about we put in the hours, the exact hours there? And we've always said, look, we're professionals. You've noted all these things that you've done. You know how many hours you've spent on those. And so I would just probably say, I would put that on LRCCD to have that kind of conversation if there's concerns about that.
That is such a relief. Thank you.
There's
Can I-
a, oh,
I was gonna say, can I make just a quick suggestion? The interpreter is here only till noon, so if we could hold some of the questions till the end, so we can get through the slides, and then I know I can stay after for some of
can
the
too.
additional things.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so
So I think we are on. I think Belinda, is this?
oh, this is still me, sorry.
Yes.
So review responsibilities, things to avoid, may not use a perceived lack of general accessibility content, captioning, use of universal design for less than satisfactory ranking on a review. May not use ex parte conversations with other faculty members who are not on the review team for less than a satisfactory review. So it doesn't matter what I've heard about James from Rebecca, I'm not allowed to put it into the review. We've unfortunately had that happen, but those are outside the scope of the review. If we're talking about big department email chains that serve similarly to a department meeting, those are work emails and could be included, but just random conversations on the street that I might have had about James, not allowable. May not violate Article 17, academic freedom, by requiring a faculty member to teach a specific text or topics in a specific order. Again, I always invite people to look at Article 17. So some folks may decide to teach things differently or assess things differently. That's all allowable under our contract. May not use equity reflection as part of the review. We've already covered that. May not use outside sources, for example, social media, Facebook, Twitter, to give less than satisfactory remarks on an evaluation, which we'll talk about that a little bit more later. And yes, some folks have unfortunately tried to do that as well, which is why it's on this list. Want to flip to the next one? If you have questions about the review process or what's allowable, you can contact any of the union presidents on the campus. Or if you happen to know a executive board member, please email them you can email them as well as our executive director, Michael Henderson. We've provided all the information there. I'm just going to speed through. So here are just some case studies. Actually, I wonder if this is a good place to pause for our interpreter, because I think I don't know that we need the interpretation for these parts.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're good.
do you want me to stop recording?
We probably should keep recording this, but this will just be more conversational, I think. So,
Okay.
but I just want to thank our interpreter who ended up losing their partner somewhere in the mix of this. But thank you very much for interpreting for us, for our faculty. Great.
And I was on mute. So I was saying, are you sure you don't want me to interpret this? So if deaf people are watching the recording, they could see the case study, the discussion around it. It's up to you. I just want to make sure.
I'm just aware we're going to go over the time, but what we can do is we have the emails of a lot of our deaf studies faculty as well, and we can email them and ask them to contact us. and we can do phone calls
Okay.
with them.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. All right, great, thank you.
This will be
Okay.
captioned also, right?
Yes.
What's that?
Okay.
It will be
Okay.
captioned as well.
Caption too, right, okay, thanks, have a great day.
Thank you
Thank
so much.
you.
Yeah, bye-bye now.
So in terms of the case studies, we provided, in some cases, verbatim transcriptions of things that were written. And in other cases, we distilled down some other pieces. So I'll go through this first one. We've changed all names for anonymity reasons, but Professor Smith is encouraged to continue with professional development opportunity provided to him through Los Rios, as well as the SCC campus. Their contributions and leadership are appreciated by the committee. Professor Smith is cautioned to confer with their department chair and dean prior to committing to the involvement with groups outside of the department. This is to ensure that new initiatives related to strong workforce and other grants and outside agencies are taken into consideration, as well as the professional development opportunities in considering their time commitments. First priority should be to achieve the degree they're working on and then instruction within the department. This will also help avoid potential burnout. So this is a verbatim thing that was written by a dean about a faculty member, and it was a clean recommendation, meaning there was no less than satisfactory markings on the review. Is this a good example? Yes or no? You can drop in the chat. We'll go into the why or why nots later. Or actually, those people can also emoji us if they want. So, but the answer is no, it's not. For a number of different reasons. It's directing service. It's not related to anything related to the performance review. It's also, again, it's also infringing on academic freedom. This individual, I guess, to direct their own services. And your chair is actually not your supervisor. So your chair doesn't give you permission for anything, neither does your dean for that matter. So there are a number of different reasons why this is wrong. So you want to go to the next one?
Okay, I think this one's mine. Another, I believe, direct example. During the workstation observation, Professor Johns arrived 10 minutes late. They indicated that they had personal reasons for being late. In over half the student reviews, students noted that Professor Johns frequently arrived late for class and dismisses class early. One student wrote, "It's rare that we spend more than an hour in each class. The committee recommends that Professor Johns take measures to ensure timely arrival to class. In addition, Professor Johns should adhere to the course outline of record and cover the expected hours of instruction." Is this a good one or not? Chat time. Cool. Yeah, I agree with you guys. With you all. There is evidence. So it wasn't just in the observation or just in the student reviews. It was a combination of both. They're clearly provided here. Questions on that? All right.
All right. Our department uses John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath for our Writing 300 class. Professor Radin chose to use Sandra Cisneros' The House on Mango Street. It is recommended that Professor Rayon comply with the department's book choice and lesson plans.
And that would be a typo by having two different professor names there.
Oh.
I'll fix that.
Yeah.
Exactly. This is infringing on this faculty member's academic freedom and their professional autonomy on this. So this through the years has come up quite a bit, actually. And it's part of those departmental dynamics that you see. Sometimes there'll be a group of folks that sort of steamroll everyone else and attempt to do these kinds of things. And then it ends up in reviews where then we can grieve and win the grievance every time on this. So this is a no-no.
I think why don't we pause the recording now?